The views and opinions on Where Did the Road Go belong to those making them. Do not mistake allowing freedom of speech for agreement. This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by the following amazing individuals: Greg Ross, Billuminati, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, and Michael Frisky. Thank you all for helping to make this show possible. And if you'd like to help out, become a patron at wheredidtheroadgo.com. It's only $3 a month for lots of extra content.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I have Mr. Christopher Ernst.
Hello, everybody.
And Matt Festa.
Hello, my darlings.
And this is the 12th anniversary of Where Did the Road Go? I almost said Last Exit. I don't know why.
Last Exit is a lot longer.
Yeah, yes, it is. But yeah, as of this airing, it will have been 12 years since I started this show.
Wow.
And
it's pretty impressive.
Tonight, we're going to be talking about a book called The Vertical Plane, which was a poltergeist case that Matt may be aware of. And in trying to figure out what I wanted to have on for the 12th anniversary, I had a few things. One didn't pan out. This was the second in my thoughts about it because this case is fantastic. And there's not a lot out there about it. So I figured, this seems like the thing that we can do on the 12th anniversary to make it special.
It's pretty cool.
And I did a quick count of files, and I came up with about 800 shows at this point.
Wow. Is that including like Patreon stuff?
No, that is not including Patreon stuff.
Oh.
So, whatever year I had the Brothers of the Serpent on with the Patreon stuff, it was well over 1,000 back then.
Yeah.
Because you figure almost every week you get extra Patreon stuff.
Yeah.
So, you figure that's... And I've been doing the Patreon since 2014 or 2015, somewhere in that range, whenever Patreon started. And initially it was small little bits, and now you get almost another show on top of it, And it's probably around 1,400 or so with Patreon. There's a lot of stuff out there.
Staggeringly impressive.
And I'm not tired of doing it.
That's the most impressive thing.
Yeah.
I was just listening to the final episode of a comedy podcast that I really like, that is going, off the air after 10 years and 500 episodes. And, that's sort of what most podcasts, unless you're like, I don't know, WTF, or something like that, or what's that NPR podcast, This American Life.
Oh, right.
I don't know.
Right.
Those are probably the only other ones that are going for such a long time. And then Where Did the Road Go?
I mean, there are podcasts that have gone longer in the paranormal field, but not a lot of them.
That's true. Not a lot of them.
And even like Project Archivist, who weren't only paranormal to begin with, they started to get bored with talking about some of this stuff. Jeff and Jeremy for Paratopia started to kind of be like, is it worth still doing anymore? Numerous points during the show. And it is, as long as you, keep looking at things from different angles.
Yeah.
I think there are very few shows that I've done here that I'm not happy with. Every once in a while, I'm like, that one was okay, or that guest wasn't great. But for the most part, yes, it's always you, Matt.
Dragging you down.
And a lot of those were earlier on when I was like, I absolutely need a guest for this week. I don't have anyone. Oh, this person will do. And then I'm like, oh, boy, okay,
Yeah.
And
I think your listenership too has also been great, and sort of as somebody who was a listener that became part of the community by all my own faults. It's I think that it's really cool too to see how people have stuck with the show.
Yes,
and continually are finding that's it hits the spot every week, which it does. The quality is consistent.
I'm glad. It's hard sometimes. It really is. And I used to be able to read much quicker than I can read now, which also helped. I do have a couple of new books from Inner Traditions that are very interesting that hopefully are going to be good to bring some new people on. The one they sent me today is on near-death experiences across ancient cultures.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, so that, they wrote me there, because sometimes they'll send me stuff on like channeled material and stuff, and I'm like, I'm not doing shows on these, but they have good stuff that I want to do shows on. So now they asked, "Do you want this?" And I'll be like, "Yeah, that one I wanted." The other one was on, I want to say psychedelics and something that sounded really interesting as well. So new guests that I haven't had on before.
Excellent.
Very cool.
Which is the other thing I'm always looking for. And stuff like this, like the vertical plane, stuff you're not hearing about generally in other cases. I mean, we did the Gef the Mongoose one, which we might do once I read the actual book.
Usually helps.
Yeah, well, I didn't have time. And you read the book, so I figured, well, I know the case. You read the book. But Gef the Mongoose is not super well known, but I mean, it was well known enough that they made a movie about it.
Sure, yeah.
The vertical plane I had never even heard of until you brought it up, Matt, and I think it was during like Last Exit or something you brought it up.
I don't even remember at what point, but yeah, I had heard about this from another paranormal show, and it, like Gef the Mongoose, it is one of those stories that is so just bafflingly weird and utterly fascinating at the same time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it feels genuine. I mean, we'll never know for sure because, we're not them. We're not the people who experienced it.
Yeah.
You can never rule out some kind of, basically the book is written by Ken Webster, who's the guy that this seemed to not even center around. It seemed to center around his girlfriend more.
Yeah.
It did. Yeah.
But we're trusting him to be a reliable narrator. And
right.
He's in his 70s now. I did look for him, and I couldn't find him. There is the edition of the book I have is a second edition, which is apparently it was out of print and very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So he decided that he was going to reprint it, and he added some bonus material at the end. Not a ton of new stuff, but just little things that, like the documentary the BBC did. They talk about that, and also some of the language stuff they found since the publication of the book. But in there it says we're going to digitize all this stuff because there's a ton of stuff that didn't go into the book because there's like boxes and boxes of communications.
Yeah.
And they're going to digitize it and put it on this website, which I then went to, and it said coming in 2022.
Maybe we should explain what the vertical plane is if people aren't.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
We'll get to that. But the point is, like, I can't find the author. I don't know if he'd even be willing to do a show. So we just kind of got to take the word of the book. And to me, knowing this stuff like I do, there's little things in here that make it seem that much more genuine, if that makes sense.
Agreed. Totally agreed. Yeah.
So, I don't know, Matt, do you want to explain it initially?
And I will do an extremely abridged version just because you can spiral off into a million different directions with this.
Which we will.
Mm-hmm. But the tiniest Cliff Notes version, it starts in, 86, I think?
Something like that,
Maybe,
yeah.
Anyway, mid-80s, I think. I think it was 84.
Regardless, mid-80s sometime, Ken Webster, who moved into a small cottage on the border of Wales, he borrows a extremely primitive, but state-of-the-art for the time, computer from work. And via that, his girlfriend, and a couple other people start to receive messages that they realize are seemingly coming from someone who lived on that property in the early 1500s. As they continue corresponding with this seeming entity in the past, they also get communications from another entity. And again, we can get into the whole weeds on what these might actually be, calling itself 2109, that purports to be the force responsible for this communication. And the whole book just centers around trying to unravel what is going on with all of this weirdness and communications with what is the big question.
Right. And it is in some places very much a standard poltergeist case. It does standard poltergeist things, but the communications are unique. I mean, you don't. There's no other case like this that I can find.
Yeah, there's communications through computer, communications through like writing on the walls and on paper.
Yeah.
There's, it started off with footprints being seen that were going like across the wall and the ceiling. And then one of the people, the aforementioned girlfriend of this guy, she started having what seemed to be these time traveling astral projection dreams where she was meeting with this person.
Yeah. So, I did take a few clips of the book here, and since you mentioned the footprints, so the footprints were one of the first things they noticed, and they didn't think too much about it, and they painted over them, and it says, the morning after the footprints were painted over, I had been downstairs to the bathroom and passed through the kitchen, perhaps twice, before looking closely at the wall, and then he says, life's too interesting to spend time wondering about walls. But it stopped me in mid-stride when I did look, because the footprints had returned. They were not exactly in their former position, so it was not possible that they were the old ones come through. They were new, six-toed, composed once more of dust from the floor. I called the girls. Nick and Deb came down. They were more than just puzzled, and Nick was, I'm quite certain, quite horrified. She had painted them out the day before. I thought she was ready to pack her belongings and go.
Yeah.
So it was one of the things that like really amused me with the book early on too, is that he gets something so weird as like six-toed footprints walking diagonally up a wall, but he is so just extremely British. He was more concerned with how the renovations were going on his kitchen.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, he seems, like a little bit of a prickly person throughout the entire thing. If you see there's some interactions he has with his students, and he's not, I would say, particularly kind to them. He seems very, he's really interested in like economics and Jaguar cars and like rock and roll music.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And he,
and he talks about this throughout the book.
Yep. It's almost like this was just an annoying side thing in his life.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I want to drive my car, but instead the poltergeist wanted my attention.
Right.
And he definitely has a good sense of humor about most of this stuff.
Oh, yeah. It's funny.
He has that good British humor going on, the sort of dry, like the comment about the walls in the last bit. But like that, footprints, kind of like in Bigfoot cases, are not uncommon in poltergeist cases. So there's that. There's the fact that they're renovating, which is another time where you're in a liminal state, so you have the potential for this stuff acting up.
Yep.
Which not only putting you in a liminal state, but it also touches on the whole stone tape theory, because this is even like directly addressed in some of the messages where the red sandstone like foundation of the house is something that was there originally in the 1520s when Lucas, the entity they're talking to, was living there. And like he talks about how that is something like being upturned and disturbed when all of this starts to happen.
Yeah. And this is, it's been, confirmed this is an actual location in an actual town and village. All of these things are true, and can be confirmed that it still exists. If you look on the, Reddit for this, there are people who, drive or ride their bikes by, the cottage, complex. It's right on the border of Wales.
So, I mean, there are things like the Enfield poltergeist where the girl who was the source of the energy there, they'd fill her mouth with water and put a piece of tape over her mouth, and then the entity would still communicate, which was the guy who said he used to live there, and he was kind of a cranky bastard, and was not happy that they were there, But he also gave information that they did not know, and they had to go to the library to verify. So, again, assuming that the narrators are telling the truth there, this may be something similar, but with a different type of communication. So it's not, although the mode of communication is very strange, it's not like the fact that you're communicating with something and the information seems to be accurate is not out of the range of normal poltergeist cases.
No, it's more the way in which it's described, because essentially the way that the story is told is that ostensibly this future force 2109 brought back, was it them or was it one that brought?
Well, yeah, that's the other thing that like complicates it, but is also a bit ambiguous, because as the narrative is presented by Lucas, this, again, another figure referred to as either one or John, is the one who initiates the contact between them all, introduces the computer in somewhat of a spectral form to Lucas, whereas 2109 like simultaneously talks about one as if this is something they weren't supposed to do, but also refers to the phenomena as a whole as like some kind of test or experiment they're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It seems like one might be a rogue member of the 2109, collective or whatever they are, or maybe part of the experiment. But it seems as if, one John brought what sounds like a computer. They referred to it in the book as a leam boist, which if you research both of those two words, it means shining box or bright box. Leam is from the old Scottish word leam, which means bright, and then boist is this archaic word for a box of some sort. And it sounds like, describing a computer essentially.
Yeah, but it also, at some point near the end, they start asking him how how he's communicating. And apparently he just kind of talks to it.
That exactly. Yes. Which is super strange. Yeah.
It's like this glowing thing.
They don't seem to need the computer either, because this starts, because Ken, hooks up this computer in his, the cottage that he's renovating in the kitchen, and his friend Nick, who's a writer, because Ken doesn't even do any writing, ostensibly, he's an economist. She starts writing on this, primitive BBC computer. And then what happens is they end up finding other files, Word files, that have these communications in what is Old English, essentially. And they end up using their friend, what's his name? Paul?
Peter.
Peter, who is a historian, and he ends up confirming and sort of deciphering some of the language, because it's all with Y's and S's look like F's and stuff like that.
Yeah, right. It's written not only in like word choice and spelling, but in syntax and everything. It is written in Middle English. And like one of the really fascinating details is as Peter is going through analyzing the language and all of this, and he's kind of like acting as an interpreter for them, like he's writing out what they want to say in a form that Lucas would be able to read. He keeps finding various little like terms and words that are close to what they should be, but not accurate. And they're chalking this up to like, a potential sign of a hoax. But then later on down the line with the communications, Lucas points out like how they've never mentioned these errors, because that's something that he was doing deliberately to test them, because he thinks they're the ones doing something weird to him.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so the fact that Lucas turned out not to be named Lucas. So much of this reminds me of things like even the Seth material, where Seth was not coming through as Seth initially. You get this like it's almost like building a mythology until it locks in. And I don't.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
Yeah, and I don't know what to make of that. It's like, I forget what Seth's explanation was, because he did have one for why he was saying he would, using a different name initially. But this Lucas goes by Lucas, but at some point he admits that Lucas isn't his real name.
Mm-hmm. And the name that they end up finding out about him was a supposedly a real person. It seems like from the research was a real person. But then 2109, gets really mad that they know the real name of this person. It's something that 2109, it's like it seems like the point in the sci-fi movie where the people from the future that are doing some sort of time travel thing are like, you're screwing it up. There's a paradox. You've split the timelines or something like, they don't say that in particular, but they get really freaked out that they know his real name.
It's interesting when that happens, because like the way 2109 phrases it, I didn't highlight that passage. I've got some other notes, but like they say that now that they know his real name, that there are two Lucases they're interacting with.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So they're dealing with different dimensional states and things like that as well. Let's see. The next quote that I took from the book says, still back on the footprints in the early days here, it says, some 2 days after the footprints had been painted out for good, and the entire episode was beginning to seem hilarious, we made a large-scale foray to Chester to stock up on some food. On our return, we left a raggedy pile of about a dozen cat food tins on the floor and too many packets, tins, loaves, and so forth tucked into too little covered space. Nothing was done about sorting all this before bedtime, but by morning, the cat food tins were neatly ordered in imitation of a human pyramid, striking out from the brick corner pillar toward the fridge like a peninsula on a rocky coast. On top of the pyramid were 3 further tins. I discovered this piece of silent housework at 8 a.m. and stood there gazing at it, all the while trying to remember if I had heard anyone get up in the night. The girls regarded it with a mixture of interest and trepidation. There followed a breakfast-time edition of Any Questions? And I also noted that as well as the renovating, so Deb was, what's his name, Ken's girlfriend. The other girl had just moved in and was just staying with them for a little while. So not only are they renovating,
Nick, yeah,
but a new person had just moved into the house when all this started.
Right.
Yeah,
and
Nick,
his girlfriend, no shade against Ken. He was a little bit older. It was 19. And I know that, that's on the older side of teenagers, but it is something that, people have, other people have mentioned this too, that, the teen girl poltergeist connection.
Yes.
Which is something that even 2109 addresses later on.
Right, exactly.
And see, that was, okay, so that was interesting. I don't remember if I kept that clip or not, but that was interesting because although it's true that, you see poltergeist activity particularly around teenage girls, it's by no means like it's like maybe 50% of the cases.
Right. Yes.
And they kind of treat it like just like people were treating it back then. That was one of the things that stood out to me where I'm like, they're kind of relaying this information as if they're getting it from today or, from then, not today, not like the future.
Yeah. Like I was telling, Matt, there is one message where they say that in 2006, they're talking about poltergeist activity and people getting hurt. And they say that in 2006, there will be there was a poltergeist incident where somebody was hurt by a falling beam. They're discussing this in the context of talking with Ken or communicating with Ken about, poltergeist activity, what's going to, how it happens and, violence and stuff like that, people getting hurt by it. And there is a case, it doesn't talk about anybody getting hit by a beam, but it is a notable case from 2006, same year they talked about, where there was violence and people getting hurt. It's called the South Shields Poltergeist. It's in a town in England.
Okay.
Yeah.
That passage in general is really fascinating because, like Chris was saying, it comes about where this is fairly a good ways into the whole interactions. Ken asks them just in general what is going on with all this poltergeist activity, and 2109 starts to explain poltergeist activity in general. And I've got that section highlighted. Let me flip to it.
Yeah, good. Yep.
Yeah, so their explanation of what poltergeist activity is, it's a buildup of kinetic energy that could be stored either in a location, a person, or just places in general that is somehow triggered by a source of frustration or anxiety. Again, it says usually associated with girls. We've talked about that already. Usually between the ages of 12 to 19. There's the thing about the 2006 case. The other interesting thing, it says, like, when these disturbances of, again, what it refers to as just kinetic energy happens, like, as that's going on, the people around it that are experiencing it will start to attribute it in an anthropomorphic way to the goings on of an entity. And it's that attribution of it to, like, a conscious entity that, like, in sort of a tulpa fashion starts to give it the appearance and presence of, like, a physical, or not physical, but like anthropomorphic entity doing this, and, like, sort of creates that feedback loop.
Yeah.
Where it, like, turns into more of, like, a traditionally thought of a haunting type situation.
Right.
Yeah. And after, at the end of this, probably in the Patreon, there's something else I noticed that I will get to that, kind of adds to my theory of what poltergeists are actually doing. But I did want to read the first passage that they got from Lucas on the computer. I think this was the first one, because the first one was, I think, was a poem.
Yeah, that
it was.
Again, for a little context for the listeners who haven't read the book, the initial thing they find on the computer is this abstract kind of not great poem. And then they start getting the responses from Lucas himself. And later on, when they find out how Lucas works and like is able to use the computer, how he's able to just talk to it and the words appear. The way Lucas found out about that is, and again, in Lucas's time, he's the only one that can see the computer.
Yeah.
It's kind of vague, either girlfriend or housemaid, whoever the woman working in his house was just going about her chores, singing to herself. And he saw what she was singing appear on the computer. So it's kind of implied that like that was the poem they see initially. And that's when he realizes he can start talking to write to them.
I didn't catch that. Interesting.
Yeah. So one of the first messages says, "True are the nightmares of a person that fears." And this is translated from the Old English. "Safe are the bodies of the silent world. Turn, pretty flower, toward the sun, for you shall grow and sow. But the flower reaches too high and withers in the burning light. Get on your bricks. Pussycat, pussycat went to London to seek fame and fortune. Faith must not be lost, for this shall be your redeemer." Maybe that was the poem.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
And then they say, and I think this was probably, okay, so maybe this was one of the other, so it says, "I write on behalf of many. What strange words you speak, although I must confess that I too have been badly educated. Sometimes it seems that changes are somewhat obstructive, for many a time they disturb me sleeping in my bed. You're a worthy man who has a fanciful woman, and you live in my house. I have no wish to alarm you, for it is only since the half-witted fool ripped apart my confines that I have been tormented at nights. I have seen many changes, lastly the schoolhouse and your home. It is a fitting place with lights which the devil makes, and costly things which only my friend Edmund Gray can afford, or the king himself. It was a great crime to have stolen my house." So it sounds like he's getting, and at some point he also talks about having poltergeist activity.
Yeah, from Lucas's point of view, they're the poltergeists or ghosts inhabiting his house.
Right.
Yep.
And so it's, like that whole thing is just weird. Poltergeists usually do not come across like this. This is what makes this case so fascinating. Kind of like Gef the Mongoose, where you had what appeared to be a talking mongoose. It's like, okay, that's different. That's not what you're normally seeing. But a lot of the hallmarks of a poltergeist case are here.
Right. But then there's the other stuff, like what ends up happening with Debbie.
Yeah, which I don't remember what happened with Debbie. Which
she
time?
starts having her dreams.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Having these dreams where she's astrally projecting through time and meeting Lucas.
Yes.
And Lucas is able to physically interact with her.
But nobody else can see her. And then he will end up saying things about their interactions in the computer and written communications, the poltergeist communications.
And
again, it's like, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just said I want to be clear here. We're talking about a very early computer. So it doesn't have internet. It doesn't have any way to hack. Right. It's not, it doesn't have any, it doesn't have a hard drive. It just has memory.
Yes.
So
completely, really rudimentary. And the only thing that I came across from people who were sort of discussing this that knew about computers of that time and these particular BBC computers that, look like old Apple computers from the 80s too, a little bit, is that there possibly could have been a way to access or, information through RFID, which did exist at that time. But, most people say that because of where it was, and the fact that, Ken was taking home different computers because there were basically these loaner computers that you could take from the school that he worked at and, bring home for whatever purposes. It wasn't the same computer, so that to me at least throws a little bit of skepticism on that theory.
Yes, it would be very hard for someone to have faked this by hacking the computer. If not outright, nothing's impossible. So I can't say it's impossible, but highly, highly unlikely. It would be like hacking a Commodore 64.
Yeah. Yes.
The 60
harder than that.
Yes. Oh, much harder than that.
This was I think 1984. Yeah.
Well, I think that's around when the Commodore came out, but the Commodore had...
Okay, I mean, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, maybe.
So 83 or 84, I think they put that out. Mm-hmm. But I mean, that was, you could hook up to a modem and stuff, but this wasn't hooked up to a modem.
Right, exactly.
And it wasn't cheap to hook up, you were dealing with phone bills.
Yeah.
You had to dial into a BBS, and then, if you didn't have one locally, it's a long distance
the BBS,
call.
And then if somebody, picked up the phone on the another,
Oh yeah, you lose everything.
Yeah,
and there was no speed there whatsoever. It was just text. But I mean, the point is, it's very unlikely that anyone was from the outside was accessing the computer. If there was any kind of hoaxing going on, it would have had to been from inside with these people. And the messages appear even when, like, Ken is not there. They usually require Debbie, but I think some of them appeared when Debbie wasn't there. But no one seems to suspect Debbie. Everyone seems to think Ken's somehow doing it. Like, at least the skeptical, like, because they bring in the SPR and stuff.
Yeah, they spend quite a bit of time with some dudes from the Society for Psychical Research.
And the first guy, if I'm remembering right, really initially just thought it was a hoax and kind of stuck with that, even though he couldn't figure out how they were hoaxing it, and then came up with something where he was somehow storing the messages on the ERAM or something, and then it would show up at a set time or something super unlikely.
Really convoluted.
Yeah, and but he just wouldn't accept that this was real. And then I think later on, I don't know if I took the notes, but later on they had couple of researchers come in, and they were kind of inconclusive. And then I think they asked the SPR to see, like, the notes and stuff, especially from the first guy, and they wouldn't give them to him.
Yep. And I think the guy who was like the lead investigator, did he like disappear or something like that? Like they couldn't find him, or he retired. And
Yep. So
that was a part of the... Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that was a part of the book that was like really not disappointing in terms of like the book not being good, but like disappointing in the sense of like it really kind of doesn't cast SPR in the greatest light because they are very dismissive of this in general.
Yeah.
Totally.
And later when the BBC do a documentary on it, they basically take that first investigator's explanation as hoax and all this other stuff, which upset these people because they're like, they did these long interviews with them, and then the documentary really casts it in a bad light and does not give all the information at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So as they're having these communications and not having any idea where they're coming from, they start asking questions. So they asked him, like, when they're trying to figure out when he is. And he says in the reign of Queen Elizabeth II. Then they said to him, "We're sorry for disturbing you. What would you like us to do? Did you live in the house in this land in 1620? Do you want to tell us more about yourself or your time? Why did you write the poem? Who is Edward Grey? Is he related to the Egerton family? Do you have a family? Is the King James or Charles Stuart? What is the charge house? Was this village called Dondleson in your life? And how many families lived here? Thank you very much for your messages. Thank you for not making us afraid." And so it says below is the transcript of the message adapted from memory and from John's notes, words which are in bold, which are not bolded here. See, and it becomes very hard to read at this point because it says, "'Twas an honest farm of oak and stone. It is helpful that you should tell me about thy time. Dost thou hath horse? Edmund Grey, brother of John Grey, lives at Kinderston Hall. Thy king, of course, is Henry VIII, who is 46. I nie woot of King James. Mine charge house is a place of lore, schooling." He says he is in March 28th, 1521. King Henry, one of my favorite kings, he was the only one I found interesting. I knew something of him, and it came clearly to mind that Henry VIII was not even close to 46 in 1521. This is now Ken talking. He had been on the throne for about 12 years and was still a young man. Even given that February 10th message, was secondhand via John's notes, and it stank of fraud. It was some days later that Peter Trindle found out that Kinderton Hall was built at the end of the 17th century, and nowhere was there evidence of Edmund Grey on this side of Rothes. This latter point didn't bother me as much as the discrepancies over the date. John Cummins even doubted that the house would be built of oak and stone. This seemed to leave the definition of charge house as the only reliable item. I was unprepared for Lucas's subtle treatment of the message and the photograph, and I was even more unprepared for his reaction to what it represented. So I think this is where they put a picture of the car or something. Was that it?
Yeah, the first one I think is the car. Because it happens with a couple pictures.
Yep.
And it says, "Mine goodly friend, I have found thy cart portraying, but it is a crude thing, for without mine horse it shall not gone far. Pray, would uncouth would be this like silk, therefore I can no skill." Oh, and I have the translation right underneath. "My good friend, I have found your picture of the cart, but it is a crude thing. Without a horse, it won't go far. Tell me what unknown wood this is. It is like silk. I cannot describe it better." Lucas considered the glossy magazine clipping to be a strange kind of wood, and the photograph was charred at the edges, and that's very interesting. In fact, showing signs of heat throughout. It was very brittle and almost crumbled in my hands. Deb said he must have taken it with him. She laughed. "I bet that if he's the devil, it would burn at the edges." But that's a thing. When things apport, and I've talked about this a million times with the Seattle Demon House, Keith Linderman's case, they have that burning Bible or that smoking Bible that's charred outside their bedroom. And when whatchamacallit, the parapsychologist who was doing the case that I had on at the end of last year, I can't remember his name. Thanks, Brain. But when he took one of those Bibles and tried to singe it, he couldn't do it. Like, anytime he put a flame to one of those pages, they just gone. There was no way he could get that thing singed. But when you look at cases of apports are almost always warm. Again, if you're taking stones in the woods being thrown at you or stones in the house that are suddenly appearing and being tossed at you or whatever, those objects are always warm. And so the picture being warm, being a magazine piece and then coming, I don't know if it disappeared and came back. I can't remember. But they put it next to the computer, and he somehow was able to see it. And then, so it must have apported there and back, and thus came back in a condition you would expect an apport to be in.
Was that the only one that was singed like that? Because I feel like I remember there being more than one. Yeah.
It happened the first one with the car, which they weren't trying to do anything. He just left a photo of clipped out of the magazine of the car that he liked, because again, so much of this book is him being obsessed with Jaguars. And then they do that again deliberately when they find a photo of, what was his name, Edmund Gray, to see if that's like the person he's talking about. And that photo also comes back gray and brittle and charred.
So there was throughout this, there was still poltergeist activity. And it's like in this one case, he says, "I was at the computer looking back through a couple of files on the disk. Deb was half watching me, but her attention and conversation were also on the goings on of our new neighborhood. All this gossip for such a small estate, but she was making friends. In an instant, our conversation was shattered by the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps on the roof. I stood up and looked fleetingly at the Velux, Velux. I don't know what that is.
Oh, it's a type of car.
Oh,
it's another car. Valhalla, yeah.
So
I might be pronouncing it wrong.
In the midst of all this, they're still having weird poltergeist activity, which makes some sense. They did note that the messages sometimes seemed out of order. I guess if you're sending messages through time, potentially they're not always going to arrive at the right time, because he seemed to be answering stuff that they had mailed earlier, sent to him earlier, that he didn't seem to respond to. And then they'd get a response, but then they'd get the response to the earlier one. And so things didn't seem completely in order. There were a lot of negative vibrations happening in the house, and there was a lot of fighting, which of course is also going to up activity. And then of course Debbie starts dreaming of interacting with Lucas, and he creeped her out the first couple of times in those sort of dreams, astral projection, whatever they were, because he clearly had a crush on her.
Yeah, it's like creepy both in terms of just the circumstance of it, and also in Lucas does not come off as a great guy when they actually do start interacting with him like this.
I think initially she could just see him and he didn't see her, and he was like yelling at the girl that worked for him or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And she was Go ahead.
It was like a 14-year-old girl that worked for him.
Yeah, which was perfectly normal back then.
Totally, it was.
So the 2109 stuff, every once in a while there'll be a message that didn't seem to be from Lucas. And they were like, well, what's going on? And I forget, was it Lucas that mentioned 2109 or did they start calling it?
Yeah, so the way this happens is the entire time they're interacting with Lucas, he'll make references to other communications that they're not aware of. And eventually at one point, Lucas, because they had like repeatedly told him that they were in 1980, whatever. Right. And he at one point says, I don't understand. I thought you were also from 2109. And they're like, what are you even talking about?
That's right.
And that's how they find out that before he had even started talking with them, he had been talking to 2109, who again purportedly had set up this entire experiment situation, whatever you want to call it. So Ken and Deb, like almost in a joking way, not taking it seriously, open up a new document that just says calling 2109. Yeah. And that's how they start interacting with whatever this other entity presence is.
And so one of the messages from 2109, I forget what they asked them, but it says, we are sorry, we can only give you two choices. And there's a lot of misspellings in this. That you either have your predicament explained in such a non-rhyme way that you may have instant understanding, but cause what should not be to happen, or 2, try to understand that you 3 have a purpose that you shall in your lifetime change the face of history. We, 2109, must not affect your thoughts directly, but give you some sort of guidance that will allow room for your own destiny. All we can say is that we are here, or that we are all part of the same God, whatever it is. And they say it is a hoax. They can't even spell because so many of the words were spelled wrong.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, a lot of 2109's communications have a very contactee feel to them.
Yes.
Especially with the talks of like destiny and...
Oh, totally. And taught you like, unified consciousness and all that. Yep.
And, you know, we did the show on the telepathy tapes, and that's something you see with some of the stuff these kids are supposedly saying as well. It comes off like contactee stuff. So it almost makes you have to stop and be like, well, maybe the contactees were in touch with something.
Oh, sure. I mean, you know, even the hoaxers, the ones that ended up having documented hoaxes like Billy Myers. Sorry, don't come after me, Billy Myers people. But, I think you have to look at it in the same way that you look at, like, I don't know, Uri Geller and Puharich, you know. There's this idea of, you know, where you can have authentic psi or, you know, supernatural or whatever, but it's not repeatable on demand on Johnny Carson. Yeah,
well, right. Yeah, it doesn't work on
So
command.
There's Trickster. I mean, meaning like you have the Trickster. It's the same thing as you've talked about many times with poltergeists, where, you know, it was originally when it's happening with some of these cases, they're actually having these experiences, and then it ends up being, you know, the people who are experiencing them fake them afterwards in order to further, you know, interest or attention, or Fox Sisters, or I don't know. There's historically so many examples of this, you know, mixing of, you know, the trickster and the paranormal, to you borrow a phrase.
To borrow a title.
Yeah, borrow a title.
Let's see.
It's almost as if it's obscure by design.
Yes. Yeah. And this, so the communications with 2109 are always pretty vague. They don't seem to, they keep saying they'll like answer questions, and then they don't seem to answer questions. There was one where they had, who was it? Was it one of the SPR guys said they were going to have a bunch of questions for them, and they weren't allowed to see them?
Yeah. And they would only like talk to one of the guys. They kept on talking about, hey, like, sending these messages being like, one of these guys has wicked bad vibes. Don't bring him in here.
Yeah.
I mean, no, they actually, I mean, I know I'm saying that jokingly, but it is interesting. They were saying that, like, some of these people are sort of, you know, they're like coolers for the phenomena. You know, they're coming in here and it makes it harder to communicate.
Which is also interesting.
Yeah.
Because that is something you see in psi research.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And of course, the explanation is, well, that's because they're being more skeptical, and they're exposing the fraud of it, when in reality it might just be that their energy is affecting what's going on. So as they continue, so they did have this guy ask them questions that they couldn't, like, they weren't allowed to see what the questions were. He would like go in and type them in and then delete them. And they got responses, but they were I don't think they ever told them if the responses were accurate or not. I think they intentionally would not respond when they said, well, did they answer you to your satisfaction? And they just wouldn't tell them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the next thing I had quoted out of here says, today, May 5th, she was quite excited. Dave was working at the cottage and had rung her about 11 a.m. because he had discovered chalk marks on the kitchen floor. I listened carefully and thought, poltergeist. Cyan continued, he can't read it because it looks like another language. My heart leapt. I left Lurich and scrambled to the phone in the hall. This was while he was working. Tea time. Peter paced up and down the hall at the cottage kitchen, avoiding the extensive chalk marks, and tried to make sense of the last words. He understood some of the earlier ones, but the last of them were bunched up under the table. Peter was thrilled. The writing was entirely in Latin and addressed to him. The hand was not neat, flowing in obsolete cursive manner in a work of some care. It was not signed. The message deciphered as, and with some difficulty translated as, Peter, you asked too much. Furthermore, Lucas went to his death. He brought death upon himself and the God's will. The last word was indistinct, so it just ends with the God's will do something, but they couldn't make it out. If not part of a joke, we guessed it had to be Lucas's friend from Stockport. It was a straight sight. A small group of us in the kitchen eagerly exchanged opinions over the mechanism and purpose of such an event. Taken at face value, the implications for the phenomena as a whole were important. Clearly, Lucas had been able to interpenetrate our world, and now, if we were right, so had John. So what happens is Lucas gets arrested for like witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
And supposedly this woman that was working there, this 14-year-old, is burned at the stake, also as being a witch. And they look up and they can't find any burnings happening back then. The problem with that, of course, is not everyone who was burned at the stake is going to end up in the historical record.
Right. And then while Lucas is in jail, the sheriff is the one who's speaking with him.
Yes.
This guy, John. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is a whole huge side episode that they explain at length where Lucas ends up getting arrested for all of this. Lucas's friend, who he had also been talking to about all of this, starts to talk to them on his behalf. As they're talking with the friend, the only way they can convince the sheriff to let Lucas go is that the sheriff wants to talk to them directly, but they can only do that with the computer or the spectral computer that's in the house. So the sheriff goes to the house and they're talking with the sheriff for a while. It's a long, convoluted drama. But again, the main thing I took away from all of that is how, with all of this in general, they are separated by, 5 centuries, but things from each of their perspectives are playing out as if they're events happening concurrently.
Right.
Yeah.
And if it's a hoax, it's a genius hoax. Like the level of detail and stuff put into this, and there doesn't seem to be any real anachronisms.
Sure.
I think over time,
the nuance of it. I mean, it's weird because it's the way it changes and it jumps from like, old Middle English guy to, future person. It totally seems it has the shape of like, oh, that's got to be a hoax.
Yeah.
But the nuance and the detail of it is, beyond the parameters physically of it. Really, like you were saying earlier, they have this sense, like this imperfect sense of truth almost.
Yeah, and they're talking about like the date not matching up to the king or whatever. I don't remember if they resolved that or not, but I mean that's something that obviously this guy knew. So if he was faking it, he would have made it accurate.
Yeah.
They do eventually settle on it being 1522, I think.
Yeah, I think so. But didn't they say the king wasn't in? The king he said was king was not in before?
But that was also like at a part where he was deliberately lying and saying things wrong, like even geographically about like where rivers and stuff were.
Okay, that's right. I knew there was some kind of explanation. I just didn't really. So what I'm saying is, like, if this was a hoax, you wouldn't have those contradictions because they wouldn't. The guy knew this stuff. He wouldn't have said, "Oh, yes, it's 1522 and King Henry was my favorite king" or whatever. That's not something unless again you're playing like 3-dimensional chess.
And like the other thing to keep in mind is how rapidly these interactions would happen. Because it is, if you just, since this is an audio show, if you just read out what Lucas was writing, because it's still linguistically close enough, you can phonetically get the gist of what he's saying. But actually seeing it written out and how completely differently it is just written back then, that is a huge amount of effort that, it can be done. That's how they were able to communicate with Lucas via Peter. But Peter himself at one point says, he would spend hours and days like deciphering what Lucas was saying and figuring out a way to write back that would be comprehensible to both of them. Mm-hmm. But like these messages would appear that fully constructed to them, in some cases within minutes.
Yes. Yeah. And so I think what happened is at some point they got rid of the computer and then they started getting these messages in chalk and stuff on the floor. Mm-hmm. If I'm remembering right. You two have read it more recently than I have.
Yeah, that was it. And then they also there's at one point where Lucas is asking for sheets of paper to
write on.
Write to them. Yeah. Yeah. So it seemed like the communications were coming through in several different ways, but they were all dependent upon that location.
Yes.
Remember? Mm-hmm. And then at some point later on, Lucas actually, is it Lucas or 2109? I think it's Lucas asks them to move the computer to this really weird place so he can see it better. Mm-hmm. And they have to go ahead.
Wasn't it that he could see it better and that 2109 couldn't?
Yes, that's right. It was supposed to be a dark spot, or something. So he could communicate with them, which he never explains why that is, though. But they end up moving it into this particular area, which doesn't correspond to anything in the modern world. But it's up on a balanced chair next to the fridge or something.
Right.
Like that.
Yes. Yeah.
Because even within the house where the poltergeisty type activity is happening all over it, the literal verbal and textual communications only happen within this one spot just in the kitchen.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. And there are, what was it? There was one incident where they left a message on the computer and Ken and whoever else went out and his girlfriend was there and someone else was there with her. And they heard a noise from the kitchen, a beep from the computer, and they went in and there was a message on the computer from Lucas.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Again, this doesn't put her out as not having something to do with it, but again, there's so many things that would make it hard for this to be simply a hoax. Yeah. There's too much here. There's too many subtleties. There's too much stuff they probably wouldn't have known to include, the picture being charred. Mm-hmm. That's a more recent thing that we've learned about apports. It's not impossible they knew somehow. Maybe they saw it in another poltergeist case, but it seems unlikely that they would have had
also,
that.
If you were going to, for whatever motivation, hoax a story like this, the reason for hoaxing something like this is you want to be believed. And if you want to be believed, you're not going to come up with something this absurd.
Exactly.
This is just such an amazingly ridiculous story. Yeah.
And it gets a little bit more ridiculous, too.
Oh, yeah. We haven't even gotten into the ufologist yet.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Quick mid-show break and a recommendation, and also a thank you. A thank you to everyone who has been a part of this show for the last 12 years in any way, shape, or form, whether as a guest or as a listener, because wouldn't be here without you. So thank you to everyone who supports what we're doing here. And hopefully we'll be doing it for a long time. As far as contact info, wheredidtheroadgo.com is the place to go. Everything is there on the website. Links to all our social media. No, should be all our social media. I might have to update a couple of things. Contact info, email addresses, snail mail address, all that stuff's on there. If you want to become a patron, you get extra stuff every month. You get the shows a week or two early without commercials and extra bonus stuff as well. So we sometimes do entire show-length Patreon episodes because we just keep talking for a while about things, depending on who's on and how much time they have. And it's only $3 a month. It helps us out greatly. And I think you definitely get your money's worth. As for a recommendation, I'm going to go back to an older one just because I went and subscribed to their Patreon so I could hear some of their side stories. There were 3 mini stories that they had put on their Patreon, and that's the White Vault. And this is a very Lovecraftian, cosmic horror type podcast. Very well done, and I absolutely love it. They did I want to say 4 seasons, and then they're now running a different story in the same universe, but it's a different sort of take on the whole thing. On their Patreon, they had 3 mini stories that kind of filled in more pieces that were also done really, really well. And so I finally went and listened to those and enjoyed them greatly. So that's my recommendation. It's on Fool and Scholar Productions, available wherever you get podcasts. The White Vault is my recommendation for this week. And again, thank you all for the last 12 years. Back to the show. You're listening to Where Did the Road Go? I'm here with Chris Ernst and Matt Festa. And I want to thank Michael Frisky for sending me this book so we could do this show. So you have him to thank. If he hadn't sent this, I never would have read it.
Wow. Thank you, because depending on where you're looking, this isn't always a cheap book to find.
No, like I said, this is the new edition. So this was luckily the updated version that was not $1 million. And it's kind of cool that Ken was like, I don't want my book to be $1 million. I'm going to republish it.
That was how I had come across it originally, because when I had first heard about it from the other podcast, that was before it had gone into another printing, and the only copies you could find were going for like $800, $1,000.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the notes I took is I said SPR get involved, which we've already discussed. And there was no activity when they were there, no poltergeist activity at all. And they said after the first time they were there, however, all the furniture got pushed up against the wall. And I think this is the picture they put in there where everything is just shoved into a corner. And like the only things that aren't completely shoved into the corner are like the stove or something that's plugged in. And it's like literally at the length of the plug and then tipped over.
Yeah, it's almost as if you imagine like the entire room being picked up and tipped on its side, how everything would just fall over and pile into one corner like that.
Yeah. And then they started getting, they were renovating this entire time, and they started getting this poltergeist activity with maybe this was the first thing. So it says ching, the sound of a small piece of metal hitting the wall, then silence. We listened to this silence, to the hum of the refrigerator. The kitchen door was ajar. I edged it open. No one there. Silence. Ching. A 2-inch off-cut piece of copper pipe rolled along the concrete floor toward the bathroom. Debbie picked it up. It was slightly warm to the touch. There we go again. A further 3 pieces arrived, but all but one in the kitchen. Never did we see any flight. After our ears had heard the ching of contact, we would see a piece as it came to rest, or we'd find it in the corner rocking slightly as it stilled. Nor did the disturbance stop when we had visitors. And one of the pipes actually hit Deb. And I didn't write down the details of that, but it actually smacked her. I don't think it really hurt her. Do you guys remember?
I don't think it did.
Not injury, but like enough to feel it.
Yeah, like it hurt.
And then I said different people affected the visibility of the apparition in the past. And that's something Lucas says, that when certain people are there, it's harder for him to see what's going on and to see the computer, basically. And the dream, there was a dream where Deb spent the entire day with Lucas. And
I want to get into that one because something really interesting happens in that dream that like the book never comments on.
Okay.
So when it's not just Ken writing the book, like he'll have, whenever something happens from like with the interpretations, Peter will write tracks like explaining his process on that. And when it comes to Deb's dreams, it switches over to sections where she's writing about it. So in the section on this dream, she again was alone in the house, taking a nap in like the middle of the afternoon or something on the couch, and starts to have another one of these dreams where she's just abruptly in the home with Lucas. And I won't detail the entire encounter because it's like not a lot of interesting stuff happens. She basically just spends an average day with him. They're like making candles and things like that. And Lucas is being very creepy.
Right. Yep.
But the one thing that is like stood out to me so much, and neither Deb nor Ken ever go into this or even comment on it at all. I wonder if like just because it was such a seemingly innocuous detail or like neither of them had any knowledge of this. At one point while they're in the kitchen, again, they were just like making candles, doing other kind of household chores type things while they were talking. Lucas goes into another room and comes back holding a small book, and he hands it to Deb. Deb can't read it. It's all in Latin. And she even says to him, like, in her best approximation of period language, so he can get the gist of it, like, this isn't my language. And he says, I know, it's just an important book to me. I wanted you to hold it. And the way Deb describes this book, besides being in all Latin, on its cover, it has, in her words, a stick with two snakes entwined around it. So very obviously referring to a caduceus.
Yeah.
And Lucas had said this is like the only book he had saved from his teacher. All the rest he had sold off because this book was like very important to him. And having a caduceus on it just so starkly stood out to me because the only context that would be in, especially this long ago, would either be in a medical context, which there's no hint at any point either in his communications or in the research they did on him that Lucas had any kind of medical knowledge, or in the other context of the esoteric sense. And like going that far back to the 1520s, that's like even before Agrippa. So like he had a copy of the Hermetica. So this is like just not a random person all this was happening to. He had like a depth of esoteric knowledge.
They do comment on that. They say that he didn't 2109 say something about him being more than he seems or something like that.
I do not remember that, but like as far as like in specific reference to like having a knowledge of the Hermetica, because I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but like from that long ago, I can't think of anything else that would specifically have a caduceus.
Yeah, no, I mean, I noticed that too, but for some reason I was like, oh, it's got to be a medical book. And I think maybe because he was going to college, I just made some leap and I thought of it as a medical caduceus. So I was like, oh, it's going to be, Hippocrates or something like that. It's got to be the Corpus Hermetica. Yeah.
They speculate that he was into alchemy or something?
Yeah.
So there was another communication from 2109 that I copied here, and I don't know why I didn't take the question of it, but their response is no. These entities haven't a consciousness as such. I think this was talking about the poltergeist stuff. Mm-hmm. It is the energy that is formed into character. It is suggested that after several small poltergeist incidents, the individuals automatically imagine the work of a ghost. So this is kind of what you were reading earlier. Is this the same passage?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the same thing.
Okay. So then it says, I said we had his name, and his real name, if I remember right, was Thomas, right?
Yeah, Thomas Hawather or something like that.
Thomas Hardwarden.
Okay.
Thomas Hardwarden. The thing is that they give him several names. There's like several versions of that are, all have to do with like different translations of the early modern English. Yeah.
So it says they tell 2109 they had his name. They wrote back within the hour. The tempo was picking up. Oh, if only you had listened. At present, you have two Lucases running around your house. If at any time the two of them to meet, we cannot explain the devastation that will erupt within the time continuum. We must stop communication with Lucas 1, but we cannot interfere with the other. While we decide what can be done to rectify this problem. You must help by giving us every word uttered by Thomas Hardwarden, from the second you received his true name. You must also state how much information you have on this man, everything, word for word. Avoid any other communication you may have with him. Desperation, be quick, 2109. Then they say, if a person is to physically travel in time, then they must take the living place of a person at the point of destination, and vice versa, which is kind of a Lovecraft story. Which one is it? It's the Shadow Out of Time.
Yeah.
And vice versa. Imagine a set of scales perfectly balanced with pebbles. To remove a pebble from one dish to the other, to keep this perfect balance, you must instantaneously remove a pebble from the other and replace them in reverse order. You may move a couple of pebbles already in the dish, but the vital balance is still kept. If someone is brought in from another dimension, then again the same procedure applies. Matter will not, as we know, ever travel in time. This is not a contradiction to the above info. We are not in control of this experiment. Yes, we are what you would call a tachyon universe, but your understanding is incorrect. We ask nothing more of you than to carry on as you would prefer. We will have John present if given choice, or you may bring another as mentioned. No, it is no concern to us that this is not proved. We will give you a plotting of a star next time, because they asked them for a plotting of a particular star. We move at a speed so that we cover every point in your time and universe, and we have no form. We feed of a net of energy that you will not have heard of.
That's one of the things that... Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that touches on one of the things that I found really interesting, because Ken and Deb and all of them assume that the fact that they refer to themselves as 2109 being the year 2109, but the way they actually talk about themselves is so much more vague and spiritual. Like they are just a non-corporeal entity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't... and they are so vague. And like a tachyon universe sounds like it came right out of Star Trek.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, tachyons are this, thing that's become a speculative, even though it has its roots in speculative physics, because we obviously haven't found tachyons. It's become part of science fiction, a huge part of it.
And also with their description of time travel not being as a physical thing, but a way of transposing consciousness to be able to see. I love that, because it's not only, again, to steal Seriah's line, it ties into the way Seth described things, but also it lines up with so many other, again, just completely bonkers books I've read about this kind of thing, like Paul Amadeus Dynock. That's the way his time travel happens. That's the way the chronovisor is described. It lines up with so many of these other weird, incomprehensible stories.
Yeah. Yep. So this, I think, is the segment. It says left for 2109 on EPROM, whatever that was. The questions could then be okay. So this is the explanation that the skeptic had for how they were doing this.
Yeah.
So they were leaving it. They were leaving the messages on an EPROM in the machine, which is basically like memory. The questions could then be examined at leisure or school, perhaps with the help of some decoding device for the EPROMs. I was furious. SPR hadn't, as far as I knew, spoken to anyone in the computer department at school who had stored it anyway. Dave was the only one at the computer, and he had controlled it throughout. John continued with what I thought were trite answers. The hoaxer returned to center stage. An alternative to the EPROM, he suggested that a sensitive microphone could have picked up the sound of the keys and recordings interpreted to determine which keys were pressed. I could not believe my ears, neither could Peter or Debbie. John was walking up and down and emphasize his ideas. Once or twice, I thought he was pacing up and down to convince himself. I see, okay. He was 99% sure it was a hoax because it had to be. He repeated that phrase over and over, sitting as I was now on the stairs because there was little room. I felt not only outside the conversation, but the guilty person. All this trickery, if it was to be believed, had to be done with my full and active cooperation. Something had happened over the intervening week to make John so forceful. From the suggestion that a third party had been bugging the kitchen, the argument had changed and swung in on me. Just how the messages were returned to the screen in this scenario was never explained. Why, if they were so sure that the EPROM chicanery was the likely method, hadn't they brought their own BBC? Or why they didn't take our machine away for testing. They were obviously caught out by there being a response and a useful one to the 10-question test, and were rationalizing it after the event. They had, in short, been careless and were taking the blame, although they never accused us and were never less than 100% polite.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And then as we get into, this must be coming from, no, this is 2109. Okay. So one of the messages after that from them says, although we have no need for a visual monitor, good lie Tom has explaining this to your kind is not at all easy. Maybe it is best compared with echoes. Two men back to back on top of a mountain, surrounded by mountains, suppose, in order that they may communicate, their vocal waves must be reflected by the minimum amount of mountains. Last mountain in the chain faces the receiver. Now imagine hypothetically for the sender to be heard by the receiver, the sender must direct this narrow channel of sound at exactly the right angle to the opposite mountain for his voice to be reflected in the right direction. If this is not to be done, say his vision is obscured by fog, then the voice may be carried by every mountain in that range along its way, being absorbed, thus being lost or extremely weak for the ear of the receiver. The screen is a guide for communications. And I again, it sounds like something Seth would have said.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. Yep.
So even though this stuff doesn't have like any kind of direct parallels to the Seth material, some of the information coming through has the same feel.
Yep.
And then it says, this short passage arrived late on Sunday, the 20th of October. I wrote it down on a scrap of paper. It was different quality from the usual. I know your greatest fears. I know how to be emotive. I can interfere with all signal transmitting devices, including computers. I have the power to make you do exactly what is required. Are you angry? Very angry? I can make the computer non-communicable. All is not what it appears to be. You can't afford to be angry. Someone's in trouble. The spelling and the style are only clues for unsigned communications, led Deb and me to think it was not 2109. It would seem that if the vertical plane is opened up to almost anyone can play. This little twist in space-time, it seems, is a type of honeypot. Someone's in trouble. It would be me if 2109 did not cough up the goodies on the 22nd, which was when they wanted the questions for the SPR. I saved the message to disk, but it was deleted by the next time I went to look for it. And some of the easily checked information was wrong or seemed to be. If someone was hosting them, they would most likely be able to make the information as accurate as possible. Maps he drew of the town. Okay, so this is, again, going back to Thomas. Maps he drew of the town were different from what they could recognize. And then we get into UFO researcher Gary Rowe after SPR dismisses
who is a
this,
real peer person.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
After SPR dismisses this as a hoax. So, Matt, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so considering the bar for weirdness that the story has, it goes up another notch when this gets introduced because I forgot who initially asked the question, but basically because they were so frustrated with how dismissive and not really getting anywhere SPR had been. 2109 says they can contact someone else. They give his name, Gary Rowe. And again, if this was like a hoax I don't even know who would be able to do this, but if it was a hoax, they would already have this knowledge. Because not only does 2109 give Gary Rowe's name, who is a very real ufologist in the area, it gives them his phone number.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they call him up and I didn't have time to share it with you guys because I found it like literally right before we started to record today. There was a UFO group who was in contact with Gary Rowe and like interviewed him just last year, and he gave his side of the account to all of this. So most of it is just him basically retelling everything that's in the book. At the very end, he does give some really interesting details, so I'll get into that when we come to it.
Mm-hmm.
But again, extremely condensed version. They reach out to Gary Rowe. By some miracle, he actually is interested in talking to them, and they don't sound like lunatics right off the bat trying to explain all of this.
And Ken is very clear about how he is not into UFOs, and he does not want to do this.
Yeah.
Nor had there been any like UFO related activity, but 2109 is the one that says they contact a ufologist about this.
Yeah.
So Gary comes in and he starts his own investigation, which is leagues beyond anything SPR was doing. For one thing, I don't know about Gary's background, but he has to be fairly well off because he's bringing in his own computer equipment, which is like a small fortune back then.
Yeah.
Like, I think in the video I watched, he was talking about, I mean, I don't know all of the nuances of the text, Seriah, you probably would recognize it better than I would. But like at the end, he describes all of it and says like it was £1,000 back then. So like imagine how much money he would have been dropping on all of this.
Right. And that was a standard price for any kind of serious computer back then. I mean, that's why like the Commodore 64 was so popular, because you could get one for like $200 or $300.
And that's something else that like SPR completely ignores. Like assuming their hoax theory was accurate, imagine how much money and technical skill would be involved in doing something like that.
And for what?
Mm-hmm.
You know, they weren't trying to sell anything. Yes, he did eventually write a book about it, but you know, the thing got one printing.
Right.
It's not like he was going out on book tours or anything like that.
So Gary starts his own investigation, and it rapidly evolves to a point where instead of just investigating things, he and 2109 are essentially having their own conversation that Ken and the rest of them can't be a party to.
Yeah.
Like he's literally having them, like 2109 will send them messages that they say they can't open. They can just print it out and not looking at it, fold it up and give it to him. And he, in the same way, gives sealed envelopes back to them, which then disappear. Even envelopes that like had objects and stuff in them.
Yep. Yeah, didn't they? What was the one? There was something in it, and they wanted to know what it was or whatever, or they wouldn't do it unless he put it in a different envelope or something.
No, it's because it had what is an Egyptian? Was it a hieroglyph or was it?
That's right.
It was like an ankh or something. There was like an object in that one.
Yeah. But there was a symbol on the envelope. Yeah.
Yes.
And so they asked them that they didn't want it because they were getting worried about the occult influences here.
Yeah, because at that point things are getting weird.
Yeah. Well, things were weird through the whole thing. But yeah, so they asked him to put it in a different envelope, and they're pretty sure he just took that envelope and put it in another one.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay, here's one of the things from his interview that wasn't in the book. And again, he fairly explicitly says there's only a tiny amount of things he can openly talk about now because 2109 like told him not to talk about, which again, it's giving kind of contactee vibes.
Yeah,
totally.
But one of the things he did, like as a way, because throughout all of this, he's still incredibly skeptical, trying to figure things out and like isn't, 100% buying into all of it. One of the sealed envelopes he does when they're doing their written correspondence like this, he doesn't detail what type of, he says it's some kind of tamper-proof envelope, but also what he puts into it in addition to his written out correspondence. At his home, he has a complete dark room. So he takes an unexposed photo in the darkroom, seals that in with the envelope, and when he gets the envelope back from them with the written reply from 2109, the photo hadn't been exposed. So at no point was it opened and exposed to light at all, but the written reply was gotten into the envelope.
Yeah, nice.
Huh. That is very interesting. In this second edition, at the end, they talk a little bit about the language a little more because since they published it, they were able to find, they were able to find like words that they couldn't find initially, but since the 80s, of course, a lot of work in language and stuff has gone through, and they have a dictionary now that they could go through and find these words, and when they entered into the popular verbiage, and found that a lot of his stuff was matching up. I thought there was one other thing in here. Like there were a couple of words that they just couldn't make out at all, figure out that they now understood the meaning of because there was no correlation to it back then. It's only in more recent years did they find that there was a correlation to these words. And they're like, oh, this word actually meant this. There was a short list, and I can't find it right now in the book. But that was also interesting because obviously they wouldn't have known about that. So, what do we end up dealing with? I was going to mention, so on Thomas's side of things, he gets arrested. They tell him he's dead, his friend, and then the sheriff say, oh, no, he's dead. And I think 2109 says he's not dead. And then Deb has a dream where she's in a pit with light, grate and light above her. And they finally figure out that he's in jail and he's in, basically in a pit. And they confirm this with the sheriff. And then they manage to convince him to get him out of jail. And I forget exactly how they do that, but he comes back. And
at one point, I think they threaten him, like, actually, since he believes they're demons, they like play the part and say they'll like smite him or something.
Yes.
I know they attempt that at one point.
And so he gets back, and he's all grateful to his friends, which he the whole time is not sure that he's not dealing with demons, but eventually decides, no, you're actually just people, and I love you, and blah, blah, blah. And so then 2109 are like, well, the communication is going to end soon because he's moving. That was the thing, right? He was moving, so he wasn't going to be able to communicate?
Yeah, there was some specific date when all this is going to end, which is the one really frustrating thing. There's no actual conclusion to all of this. It just stops.
Right, but they knew it was going to stop, which is also interesting because usually this stuff peters out. This didn't peter out. That was it. There was no more. And they sort of got to say goodbye to him, and he said that he was going to write a book of all this and hide it, and that he wanted them to find it, like hide it in some university or something. And as of the publication of this, they had not found it.
No, people have been looking, but no one has ever found his book, which, if I'm remembering right, he wrote it with a friend's help, and it was a book written in Latin, and he even gives like whatever initial inscription he put as the opening to the book.
Right. Yeah. Right. So, I mean, that's a long time for a book to survive. Someone may have found it and tossed it out. 2109 said that they were going to find it. But, I mean, again, by the time the second printing's happening, Ken's in his 70s and he hadn't found it.
Sure.
So
now, one of the things that I found really interesting is that after this, there's a postscript, and there's actually a message from 2109 that comes as part of this postscript. And in the postscript, what's happening is that Ken is basically musing about the whole thing, and he's thinking about, UFOs and time, and this is in January of 1986. And, he starts thinking about, maybe, our time slips, are they responsible for things like, UFOs? And he talks about seeing the Yetis or the Surrey Panthers. Are these glimpses of the past? And, are these, time slips, as he says, generated by a mixture of aspects of consciousness and special places? So what he ends up doing is that he says he puts, he's talking to some of his friends about this. And so he put the question to 2109. And this must have happened before they ended up leaving the cottage. But he gets a response. And this is on the 18th of January, 1986. And what they come back with to say is time, UFOs, and the most other types of the paranormal are in some way all connected. In certain geographic locations, there is what we call areas of convectional magnetism, misspelled. These can be explained by the magnetic lines that run around the Earth. Imagine, if you will, circles running around the Earth clockwise. These are positive lines of magnetic force, PLMF, and also circles running anti-clockwise around the Earth, negative, NLMF. When two opposite running lines are crossed, usually a permanent crossing rather than random, the light-time continuum is vastly distorted, so much that a sensitive individual may witness what you may call a timescape that is a glimpse of a past event or that of a future event. We hear you say, but you said matter could not travel in time. This is true, as if matter were to travel by physical motion, then mass around the moving object would be so dense that the Earth and most other celestial bodies in your solar system that would be consumed or imbalanced in such a way that they would decay rapidly. Then it goes on, I'm sorry, my dogs are barking at something out there. They're barking at the knowledge I'm dropping from 2109. They say, then how? Imagine, again, please, a person from the future happily floating along in his silver spaceship, crossing an area of convectional magnetism. All of a sudden, his instrument panel goes shaky. He may feel slightly dizzy or nauseous. A green mist caused by it says atmospheric distortion, but maybe it means atmospheric distortion, forms around the vessel. He then will probably fall into a trance state of such depths that his soul is squeezed through the light-time gate and forced to project a physical mirror image of him herself as a word missing of their place-time origin and their immediate vicinity. This can occur sometimes for only several seconds and does only registers for that individual's subconscious, but onlookers from the time which is broken into will witness the very physical sight and actions of this alien from another time then, totally by confusion. Elaborate on the facts. We are not saying that there is no other life outside your planet. On the contrary, there is life elsewhere, but the above phenomenon is the most usual, as space is infinite to the mortal, and the chances of another race coming across the earth is not really in a bracket of probability. There was once a great philosopher who likened time to an infinitely high block of flats, each floor to represent events all piled on top of one another, vertically to represent the geographical location, and laterally to represent each floor. A little correcting, finish after, unsigned. And this was, I think, the last communication that he got from 2109.
Yeah, that was, I don't even know what to make of that, because again, it sounds like almost gibberishy at times.
It sounds like they're describing seeing a UFO as a time slip of an alien.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. We are out of time, however, ironically. So we'll continue this in the Patreon segment, but Chris, people can find you where?
brightrectangle.com.
And Matt?
Instagram, Facebook, and Blue Sky, everything under Tiamat's Garden.
All right, and thank you both for doing this and for being on the 12th anniversary show of Where Did the Road Go?
Yes, congratulations.
I want to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons. I can't do this without you, so thank you for supporting the show, and know that every positive thing that comes out of this show is partially because of you. I want to give a special shout out to all my patrons who are pledging $10 or more a month. Greg Ross, John Blackburn, Madeline J., Marty Garza, Matt in Delaware, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, Tim, Andrew Nichols, Matthew Sproul, Marthartha, Midnight Review Presents, Christine, a blue second-gen MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Abby Allen, Patricia Giaquinta, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Billuminati, Bright Rectangle, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, Land of the Crazy and Communicable, Corey Nelson, Diane B., MTK, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, History and Coffee, J. Otto Bullitt, Jack Huntington, James Lindsay, Jim and Sophie, John Mattingly, John Bracken, Jonathan Frost, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Shurek, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Linda from Michigan, Linz Jackson K., MJ Armstrong, Mark Shoemaker, Mark Brady, Mark Smith, Paul Jeffries, Perry Peters, Philosopher of Mirrors, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Sam Sharon, Sasha McHale, Schmooples, Devourer of Mortal Souls, Stacy Sherwood, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, Thunderboy, Tyler Glimstead, Varush K., Victoria, Vincent Trewell, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDT Skunkworks, Colin Karras, Craig Sagastumi, and Matthew Brown. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. There's a Patreon extra for this show where we continue talking about the vertical plane as well as some other stuff. I hope you enjoyed this anniversary episode. It was a little different than the ones I've done in the past because I really wanted to get into this book. I really enjoyed it, and I love having both Matt and Chris on, so I figured this would make a good 12th anniversary. We didn't talk a lot about the show because we've done that in the past. So, I limited it to just the beginning there and wanted to devote the rest of it to the vertical plane, which I definitely recommend picking up now that it's available at an affordable price. It's well worth the read. I want to thank Mark Smith for upping his membership. Glad to add your name to the list. If you want to become a patron, it's only $3 a month. You get extra stuff after every show, almost every show. Every once in a while, we don't do a Patreon segment, but there's almost always an extra bit and sometimes a long bit. And you get a bunch of other stuff as well. You get the shows a couple weeks early because I'm a little behind. It's been a couple weeks early and commercial free as well. I put up a lot of extra stuff here and there. If you want to become a patron, just go to wheredidtheroadgo.com and click on the Patreon link. I'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.